Everyone, welcome back to Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes, and I'm the Chief Sales Sergeant of Bulletproof Selling and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. Now, here at Bulletproof Selling, since day one, we have been on a mission to help salespeople remove hope from their sales strategy. Now, you may be out there selling, you may be having the best year of your entire career, and you're thinking to yourself, well, hope? I'm not really relying on hope. Let me put it into perspective for you. The men and women that I was able to travel with on the battlefield, the Navy SEALs, Marine Corps snipers, Green Berets, they were the top performers in their industry. I mean, you don't, kind of like wing your way into becoming a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret or a Marine Corps sniper for that matter. But these men and women understood that if they relied on hope or if hope crept into their plans, not only would it mean mission failure, but it meant a lot of them wouldn't be coming home. So if those men and women can take hope seriously and know how dangerous it can be, as a salesperson, as somebody that's dedicated to service as much as selling, I think you should really take advantage of the fact that we can remove hope from how we operate. And not only does that allow us to get into more conversations and better conversations, it allows us to sell more, which means, hey, at the tail end of it, we can serve more. So since day one at Bulletproof Selling, we've been bringing on guests, Hall of Fame speakers, best-selling authors, men and women that have led international sales teams, and of course, those that are out there helping sales teams remove hope from how they sell in a variety of ways. And out of every one of these episodes, with our guests, we focus in on a single issue where we think hope is entering into a lot of people's sales plans, and we build a system to allow you to remove hope from that area of your sales cycle in your conversations. And you can use that system no matter the size of your goals or the size of your team. Now, in the military, we had this wonderful thing called asymmetrical warfare. It sounds like a really big word. It sounds like something you'd have to have a college degree to figure out. But if a junior enlisted person like me could wrap their heads around it, I think you can too. And the reason it's important is because it's likely happening in a negative way to your sales. Asymmetrical warfare in the military means the things that don't involve a bunch of troops and tanks and artillery lining up in a single file line and marching into a city. That's symmetrical warfare. Asymmetrical warfare is figuring out what are the things that are unique to this situation, to this high value target, to this enemy that we're facing, and how do I bring my resources to bear in an innovative way? And this is exactly how the U.S. won the Revolutionary War. The British were fighting a symmetrical type of warfare. We decided because we didn't have the numbers to go up against them one-to-one, we were going to have to fight asymmetrically. So how does this operate for you in sales? Well, believe it or not, a lot of things are going to be standard in every one of your conversations. And I know you think every prospect is different and every deal has to be customized, and to some extent that is true. But if we don't take care of the things that we can take care of, put them into systems ahead of time, then we're forced to figure everything out on the fly. So today's guest is going to help us walk through the value of taking what we know, breaking it down into something that we can apply in every conversation so that we're not just trying to pitch the same features and benefits to every prospect. Rather, we can take asymmetrical information against the asymmetrical type of selling that you're likely doing today. We can reverse it. We can make it so that you can step into a conversation having the things already lined out that you need to have lined out so that you can be more present and so that you can sell more and, of course, serve more. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome onto the show Mr. Brady Jensen, the founder and CEO of Aggregate Insights. Brady, welcome to Bulletproof Selling.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Brady, talk to us a little bit about your journey through sales. I always find the backgrounds of the people on the show interesting because everybody comes from a slightly different path, and yet we all end up in this spot where we realize we have to stop relying on hope in how we sell. So walk us through your sales journey and talk to us about who you serve and how you serve them today.
Yeah, I mean, it's been sort of a long and somewhat storied career that started in sales and frankly has ended in sales. In maybe a different capacity, but very early on in my career, I learned that I was pretty good at selling stuff. It didn't mean I was selling complex deals. It meant by and large, I was selling things like telecommunication services, etc. Found that I had a knack for it. Ended up in software about 15 years ago or so, and it really opened my eyes to how you need to sell in more complex environments, how you need to make sure that you are prepared. You can't handle it the same way as maybe SMB knocking doors and just kind of winging it when you get in there. What I did after good number of years as a successful seller was I did what very few sellers actually tend to do if they are successful. And I decided I wanted to be a product marketer. I thought it was interesting work. We sat next to the product marketers. In some ways, I would help them out. And I thought to myself, you know what? It would be really cool to see like what is the intersection between what sales does and how product marketing can make it easier to sell. How can I sort of augment what I do as an individual by being able to do it more broadly? I remember as a seller, I used to go to, sales kickoffs, other areas or times when sales would congregate and marketing would show up and they would give you all the information. Here's how you should pitch. Here's your pitch deck. Here's what we want you to talk about. And I remember sales was always a little bit wary of the whole situation, right? And I always thought, well, the one thing marketing is probably not doing well enough is sharing how they got there, and bringing the receipts to show a sales rep who says, well, my way kind of works for me. Why do I need to do what marketing tells me to do? Well, I became a product marketer only to become really quite frustrated because I found out that in most cases, in my personal experience, there was no receipt. There was no way of saying, well, we talked to a bunch of prospects. We talked to a bunch of people you want to sell to this year, and this is exactly how they want to be sold to. Here's the language that they use. Here's how you get a deal done with this type of buyer. That stuff wasn't happening. It was given to the sellers, but it wasn't validated with people in markets. So, of course, I became very frustrated and wanted to do something about it. And so I started a company that focuses exclusively on this idea of primary research that actually sits between sales and marketing to make sure that you have a single source of truth about who you're even selling to, what they want to buy, what they actually value about what you sell, and help make sure that the sales team has everything that they can do to prepare for and create and minimize this asymmetry that you were talking about, which is so true. I mean, you have an asymmetry both with the competitors you are competing with in deals, right? You don't know what they know. They don't know what you know. You can do a whole lot to give yourself a better chance of winning simply by being prepared and making plans and knowing who you're going to sell to. But then the buyer themselves, there's a huge information asymmetry in most companies where buyer profiles and who they are and what they care about is created in a couple of hours in a boardroom with some execs and then pushed out to the sales team, and you guys become test pilots to find out if it's going to work. And a lot of times it doesn't work, right? And I, having been a seller and spent time carrying a bag and having a quota, I can't, that's my mission now, is to make sure that sellers aren't put in a position where their livelihoods are up to the creative writing of the marketing department. So I want to spend my time working with sales and marketing teams, right, to figure out how do we change this dynamic and make sure that when you actually go about selling, that you're just as prepared as you possibly can be to win deals. But the only way you can do that is by having trust and like minimizing the risk of this internal civil war between marketing and sales where you're both shooting at each other and it's, well, marketing didn't give us real qualified leads, right? And marketing's over here saying, well, sales didn't close the opportunities, right? Like there's all this room for this bad blood in between if there isn't a single source of truth that is neither sales nor marketing, but the actual buyer in flesh and blood who buys this stuff.
And so you talked a lot about the asymmetry that we discussed. So I'm curious then on the salesperson side, it sounds like salespeople are already pretty wary of anything they get from marketing. and with good reason, right? Because marketing's not banging the phone all day. They're not meeting with these buyers all day, even though that's probably something they should be doing in the research phase of producing the content. So where do you see salespeople then falling back on hope? Are we still, as a sales industry, hoping that what marketing delivers to us is going to work, or is hope factoring into something else that we should be aware of?
I think that there's a lot of hope, even if you don't recognize that's what it is, right? Like there's this, there's this push to say, well, sales is a numbers game, which seems to be sort of sliding out of favor. And now it's not a numbers game, but we still aren't prepared. So now we really are hoping, right? We're hoping we're going to talk to the right people. We're hoping they're going to care about what we're talking about. But chances are, if you haven't done some work either individually as a sales organization, pumping this information back into marketing, and enabling marketing to help give you what you actually need, which is not a new one pager, right? I think that's the thing that every sales team wants or brings to the forefront is, I want a one pager on this. I'm trying to sell this weird vertical we've never sold to, so I need all this new collateral, right? New collateral, set it aside, like have marketing become your support in making sure that you're as prepared as possible for every stage of the sales cycle. And I think that's the way that you strip out this hope, which, I mean, by call it winging it, call it whatever you want, like the majority of the time, without having a clear view of that prospect, of that buyer, what they care about right now, right? Not what they cared about last year or the year before, what do they care about right now? How do they prefer to be sold to? How are you actually going to get them to pay attention and even, take a meeting to begin with, is stuff that can be learned. And if you look at it across the entire organization and not just on an individual rep level, all of a sudden you do have this opportunity where all of sales and frankly all of marketing can benefit, because you're pooling these resources, you're sharing insights, and it's not every man for himself. And the truth of the matter is, what tends to happen more often than not is that because sales doesn't trust marketing, every salesperson does what they think has worked for them in the past in a different company.
We're just trying to recycle what might have worked years ago without updating it, even though we haven't taken into account the economic changes or the market changes. So this is brilliant. So there's an old saying that goes somewhere along the lines of people won't care about you until they know how much you care about them. And I think that really applies to what we're talking about here. So let's build a system to make sure that we know what our prospects care about before we pick up the phone. And then in those conversations, we are building a better picture of what our prospects care about. Because until we know what they care about, they probably don't care about the features, the benefits, the end state of what our product has to offer. So if we, in the military, Brady, every single time we instituted a new system, it trimmed more hope away from our operations. And so, of course, we were chock full of systems from the moment we woke up to the moment we went to sleep. If they could have given us a system for how we dreamed our dreams, they probably would have tried. So every new system in sales, of course, trims more hope away too. So we use this acronym TRIM because, of course, the military is big on acronyms. So the T in TRIM, it stands for trigger. If I'm trying to ascertain what this prospect I'm about to get on the phone with cares about, which may be different than the last prospect with the same job title in the same industry, we just don't know yet. How am I going to trigger this system? At what point in my sales cycle do I need to stand up something that allows me to understand what this prospect likely cares about, so that when I show up, I'm not just winging
it? Great question. I think that in keeping with sort of the theme of your podcast, right? A lot of salespeople are familiar with like a sales battle card, right? Here's your battle card on an individual competitor. Now, I think that there's a lot of room for improvement there to make them way more actionable as a general rule, but they have something there, right? But what about your sort of playing card for that type of person? Now, everyone's individual and everyone's unique, but the best place to start is by saying, what is common? What are the commonalities between all these different people who are VP of IT, or all these people who are the CHRO, or whoever you're selling to? If you can clear up the 90% of the things that they're all similar in, then you're going to be able to show up to that first meeting. That stuff goes on autopilot because you know it. And you can focus on that 10% variance that is going to make the difference between a buyer who says, these guys, I'm not really sure, and them saying, this is the vendor who gets me, right? They get me because they know 90% about me before they show up. So then the 10% you're extracting from them, you can ask extremely well thought out questions because you know enough about them that you can pose questions in a way that you're already assuming what you know you can assume, and you win this battle. I swear every time we see this happen where sales reps make this part of their system, they get the buyer to very quickly shortlist them because they say, I don't care what they sell, they know me, right? They know me, they know who I am. I'm surprised they haven't been in my role, right? Because you can talk to them at the level of a peer versus talking to them in the alternative, which is you go into the room and you start asking a bunch of really generic questions and they're like, have you done this before? Like, do you know anything about me, right? People love to be known
that trigger
about.
element then that you've made very clear about figuring out what are the 90% things these folks have in common. So I can fill out the last 10% in the conversation on the call, get it into my CRM, let my team access it if they need to. So let's move into the R and trim, which is making this a repeatable process. And I'm thinking in this process, it's probably got two parts. This is just my guess. The first part is going to be how we research that 90%, because it might look different industry to industry. And then the second part is how do I leverage that information in the call to fill out the last 10%? So what are maybe 2 or 3 steps that you would advise a salesperson or a team do to make sure that they are putting together the right 90% of information and research before they get on the phone? What are those 2 or 3 things we absolutely have to do?
Yeah. So thinking back on my own career, when I was before I became a product marketer and was still a sales rep, I became very interested in the market and the buyer. And I used to actually share sort of an internal newsletter with the company I was working for that talked all about the market and the buyer. And so my point is that even an individual seller who is not, even the strategic account rep can, because I did not reach those heights, but can make a huge difference if you start being perceptive and start paying attention. And after every one of those meetings that you have, you jot down, what did I learn about this person? And then the next meeting, you jot down, what did I learn that was the same and what did I learn that was different? And you do that 10 or 15 times and you will have a composite view, an aggregate view of that buyer as an individual sales rep without having to, go to marketing or go to someone else to do it. Now, I think that there's a good, better, best, right? The good is that where you as an individual seller can do this. The better is to involve your organization and get marketing starting to pay attention, which is part of the reason why I transitioned is they said, well, you're already doing what we need, right? So it was an easy transition. They're like, well, you do this for the entire company anyway, and everybody pays attention because they're hungry for this information. And all of a sudden marketing is like, wow, this is really useful. Like not just for the sellers, but we can repurpose this and the demand gen people can get better at actually getting sales qualified leads that are actually sales qualified leads. So the better sort of is involve them. The best, I think that there's still a lot of benefit of having a third party help support you here because buyers tend to tell us all their dirty secrets and their darkest corners and where the skeletons are because we have no hunt in the game. It's not something that is an absolute necessary thing to do, but I think when you're at the level where you're shooting for to get to the absolute best, that's the way to do it. But there's no secret on how to do it. It takes work, it takes effort, but you can build a really good view of exactly who you're selling to, even at the rep level. If you just pay attention and debrief after each call with yourself, what did I learn? What did I disprove? What are some of my hypotheses that I had coming into this? Which ones held true and which ones was I told, no, you're completely off base. And the fact of the matter is, like a buyer, even if you say, I assume that something looks like this, buyers actually like to educate. So even as long as you're on the right track and you're engaging with them, they're willing to tell you why you're wrong, and you don't lose points for it.
Yeah, that's amazing. So we've got, I want to make sure I capture these steps because these are brilliant to walk into any conversation with. First, I want to ask myself, what did I learn from the last 10 conversations that these folks have in common? And what you're going to get out of that, if you do that by job type or by job title, you're going to get a list of things that then you can go out and research and find more specific things about, so that when you step into the next conversation, you're better prepared. The second thing you mentioned was, all right, you've looked at what they had in common. What was unique about each of these people? And out of that question will then get you the questions that you need to dial in on with every future conversation to figure out, all right, I got the 90% from part one of this. Part two, that last 10%, they're unique, the last 10 ways they were unique. How do I prove or disprove that on my next few calls? And that way you're asking really specific, meaty questions, and they're going to say, well, you're kind of off base, but you're close. Here's exactly how it looks in my organization. And they'll share that with you because they sense you're part of their world. The third step you gave us, which was, hey, what assumptions were proven right in those last few calls? And which ones was I completely off base on? And you can absolutely adjust the ones you were off base on, or you could even use that, I'm sure, in a pretty humorous or funny way. Mr. and Miss Prospect, the last couple folks I called, I thought they were dealing with this, but they actually told me they were dealing with that. Do you find that to be the case? And they're like, boom, now you're in their world, right? Because you exactly get them. So those are some great couple of steps to make this repeatable. Now, I want to figure out how to make it improvable. That's the I in trim. We learned really quickly on the battlefield that our environment was dynamic. It was changing all the time. And I'm sure no matter what industry any of our listeners are in, it's shifting pretty quick as well. So if I want to improve the way that I'm gathering information, leveraging it, and filling in that last 10%, what are the things that I'm going to do to improve this system, and how often would you recommend I do it? And this may be where marketing steps in. I don't know. You're definitely the one with more marketing experience. Walk me through how I would improve this.
Well, I think that there's two pieces. On the individual or team level, the way you improve it is you'd never stop. Like, as soon as you stop, you've ossified what you believe to be true, and whatever change happens in the market will go past you, right? You're going to very quickly find that all of a sudden what was landing a year ago is not landing because you're stuck at this sort of snapshot of who your buyer was then. One of the nice things about this, finding out what the 10% variance is that you can also track that, and you can say, this is the 10% that was variance, but actually some of those things you're going to find will become sort of grouped together, and you'll see that like something becomes common over time based on the information sources that your buyers pay attention to and who's telling them where their own market is going. So it's a canary in the coal mine sort of thing to constantly maintain that curiosity. As soon as you think you know it all, then you're going to lose any advantage that you gained. That's one of the things that I think the best sellers have, and one thing that I did not really understand as a young seller is that curiosity can oftentimes make the difference, right? If you're a curious person, you're going to dig into the corners that other people aren't. You're going to find the pain points that other people just can't find because of it. And then, on the other improvable is definitely, involve the marketing folks. I hate to say it, but there's a lot of marketing teams out there that need to be taught how to be effective for sales. And I will say that most of the time when marketing goes to sales and ask, what do you need from us? It's a list of content, which is not, I mean, that's great, but the number of companies that are swimming in content, but there's a drought in deals getting done is so common. Like content's great, but the fact of the matter is, if you can partner with marketing to say, here's how we need you to help us organizationally, so that this one thing that this one team or this one individual is doing can be actually applied across the entire organization, you'll see huge success. I mean, sellers, some might say, well, they don't have any incentive to make anyone else better, or they're going to hide their secrets or how they get their deals done. I don't think that that's true. It's my experience, sales reps are actually quite giving. Sometimes the seller is being successful in a way that they're not even sure how, right? In which case they're going to say, well, make some more cold calls and, hustle more and all this stuff. But if a seller can do this and they know that this is the key that unlocks their success, I have no doubt that seller is going to be able to say, if I help marketing get this for the entire organization, it's going to raise my profile. I'm going to be more successful in my career. That's how I would think about it. It's all about, like, how do you operationalize it past a group to make sure that every organization that is customer facing in any way can have this information, and it's all of a sudden it's an amalgamation of hundreds of calls with buyers, and you become even more specific about exactly who they are, that compared to what one rep can do on their own, you'll start to get even more clear and sharp on it.
And that was the power that we actually saw executing this type of campaign, even on the battlefield. And we were gathering intelligence. It wasn't just from one random person, walking through a neighborhood once every couple of months. They were gathering intelligence from hundreds of us every single day and then amalgamating it, just like you said. And that way we could get a clearer picture that was a lot more up to date and accurate. So that's a great way to improve, is never stop assessing. Keep looking at how you could be more curious. And the M trim, which you've actually already tapped into, so I appreciate you already, giving us part of this answer. The M trim is to measure the results of this thing. So if I'm taking the time to do this, it's going to take time away from me just banging the phone, smiling and dialing. It's going to require a little more research. Maybe my conversations are going to go longer. In the initial part of rolling this out, it might extend my sales cycle a little bit before I get good at it. And then I'll watch that thing accordion back down, because, of course, people are going to buy faster if they feel like we're part of their world. But the couple of things you mentioned that we should be measuring was, how often are our assumptions correct? So if I step onto this call, because I've asked, myself all the 10 things that these people had in common in the past, I'm building my kind of 90% list of things. I'm going to make the assumption that this person's also dealing with X, Y, and Z. I try to prove or disprove that on the call, capture that as something that you're measuring, because out of that, getting it out of your head, getting it under your CRM, into paper, it's going to make sure that you do get better, so that that's one less assumption you have to make in the future, or hey, that's part of the 10% variance. I thought everybody in this industry was worried about budget, but I met 3 buyers that just weren't, because they're part of companies that meet these other criteria. So that's a great thing to be able to assume against and assume for. The second thing you mentioned measuring was, hey, how often are we proven wrong? How often do I step in here with this assumption and it's just blown out of the water? Because I want to capture what's different about that company so I can sell better to them in the future. So those are 2 great things to measure. Is there anything else that you'd recommend that we measure here to test the effectiveness of this system?
Yeah, on a larger scale, a CRO, I think, should be measuring how many sales reps are on message, right? Because if you're doing this right and you are consistently improving, you should see that there's a huge uptick in the number of reps that are no longer trying to take their own shot or trying to tell a different story or sell in an entirely different way. Lots of CROs will come to us and say, look, number one, all my people are off like message. Number 2, I don't know which one to tell them to actually do, but I actually don't think it's the marketing message we've gotten. Right. And so for them, like, just uncovering enough to be able to have marketing go back and put an edit to what the message is to basically match up with what you're learning about your buyer, and then recycling that back into the market where sales reps are going to say, okay, so this actually worked across all these accounts that we all want to sell to with real buyers in market. That's a huge thing. I talked to a CMO of a big bank recently, and even she was like, you know what? I don't think our marketers are comfortable talking to buyers, right? That's one of the things that I think has been unique about my journey, is a lot of sellers might become product marketers or marketers, but in most cases that's because they failed at sales, right? They're not necessarily one that was like, oh, I was killing it in sales. Like, I was an inside sales rep for the year I left. And part of the fight was like, they were like, you're not going to marketing. Like, you're beating quota, right? But the point being that like you can wait around for marketing to start feeling comfortable talking to actual prospects who are not their customer already, and you're going to be waiting a long time. Unfortunately, that's just not a skill set. That's not a skill
That's
set.
actually a great piece to kind of wrap this up on. If you're waiting for marketing, you may not be in line with your sales goals. That whole asymmetry is probably not aligned. So this is a brilliant system end to end on how we can determine really what the information we need to present on to make sure that our prospect cares by making assumptions, testing them, and continuously improving. I couldn't have said that better than you did. So for folks that want to get deeper into your world, sir, for aggregate insights, they want to find out more about the content you're releasing, how you're going about doing all this great work you've talked about. How do we get more into the world of Brady Jensen?
Well, anybody who wants to chat, I'm an open book when it comes to how we do all the things we do. I think it's best to spread the knowledge of how it's done as broadly as possible to achieve my mission. Frankly, there are places where we can help, but we want to be very open. So if you want to hit me up on LinkedIn, it's just Brady Jensen is the handle there. And then you can also check us out at aggregateinsights.com/podcast. We do have a guide on how you go about doing win-loss program specifically to find this information that's available there as well to your guests.
Oh, that's awesome. If you're not taking advantage of a better debrief of your win-loss, you should, because it absolutely makes a difference in your sales cycle. Of course, being able to serve more folks. For the folks catching us on the live stream, make sure you're subscribing to that YouTube channel. If you're listening on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, leave us a review and let other salespeople know that with Bulletproof Selling, you no longer have to be falling back on hope in how you sell. And thank you for giving back to the sales community today, Brady, for serving. And let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.